Hey folks, David Stewart here. Hope you guys are having a great day. Time for a little review, a movie review, a retro movie review. Prince of Egypt from way back in 1998. This is a pretty good movie. I remember seeing it back in 1998 when it came out, and it was one of the very few movies I've been to where people actually clapped at the end, which is kind of a weird thing to do when you think about it because there's no performer there to hear you clapping. It's not like clapping at the end of a concert where the performer receives some of that applause and gets energized from it. There's no one there to hear it. But people liked the movie so much at the time that they clapped at the end of the movie, which was pretty cool. I hadn't seen that I could recall before then, and I've heard it a couple of times or seen it or experienced it, I guess, a couple of times since then. But that one stood out to me. I think it's a pretty universal story. It's a story that's exists in several different faiths, and they did a pretty good retelling of the biblical Exodus story. Keep in mind, if you ever go and decide to read the book of Exodus, you'll find that this story just takes the very first, it's just the first part of that book, but that's what we get for Prince of Egypt. I think at the time it was the best or like the highest grossing or most successful non-Disney animated movie that had been made up until that time. It was made by DreamWorks, not by Disney, and it's a traditionally 2D animated film. So going back and rewatching it this last week with my kids, it was good to see a really high production 2D animated film. I think those animated films, whether they were Disney movies or they were DreamWorks movies, from the end of the 1990s, you really are seeing the height of that American 2D animation production. And you weren't really going to see something like this again, at least not in this style, where there's really fluid, bright 2D animation that's actually drawn and it's combined with 3D animation in some places, and everything works really well together. I think other movies from around this time would be like Tarzan, just really high quality animation. And I think that's of course paired with a really good story that you're starting with, and you have some great songs by Stephen Schwartz, I think was the composer who wrote all the songs. Although Hans Zimmer did the score, he's credited for the score. It's really about those songs. They're very memorable songs. Around the time this came out, everybody was doing Prince of Egypt music. Every choir had a Prince of Egypt tune in their, in their spring concert or whatever, or maybe their fall concert during the next year. I remember the Fresno State Marching Band did a Prince of Egypt show. I remember learning the Prince of Egypt music for that show, and it was a pretty good show. It was pretty fun, and I think the music was so memorable, and it worked so well. So everything in this movie really works well together to produce a good and memorable movie. It's probably the best example of a 2D animated movie that's not from the Disney camp, but is still very much in that stream. And I think it's worth watching today. It has a decent retelling of the Exodus story. Now, one of the things about any Hollywood production of some kind of biblical story is that it's not going to be really accurate for the biblical story. And in fact, this one is no exception. One of the things I always notice whenever there's a retelling of Exodus is there's never the correct relationship between Moses and Aaron. Moses has difficulty speaking. This is explained in the Bible, and so Aaron is like speaking for him. So Moses has this kind of apostle in the form of his brother Aaron. Aaron's the one who does most of the speaking and is doing basically responding to what Moses is telling him to do. So there's this weird extra layer of separation between like God, prophet Moses, and Aaron speaking and doing things. I haven't seen that in a movie. The focus really tends to be on Moses as a heroic figure, Moses as the guy who does everything, and not really Aaron. In this movie, Aaron is like the jealous brother. He's upset that his brother, doesn't know he's a Hebrew and is grown up in the Egyptian household and that sort of stuff. And he's just sort of a foil to this idea of a heroic Moses, this Moses who's doing discovering who he really is, and you know, going away out into the desert and coming back as this more fully formed person, as a more heroic person who's doing the hard work that needs to be done to accomplish the story. I just kind of wish sometimes that someone would have the courage to like shoot the thing that's actually there. One of the interesting things that I think about with the Exodus story is that one of the things are often missed from the Bible because you're doing a literal retelling of what's in the Bible, and you're not thinking about any of the symbolic layer of what the signs that are there in the Exodus story. And this might be because the Exodus story is common to several faiths, including Judaism and Islam, but especially Judaism. Judaism is missing the Christian context, the Christian context that exists for the Exodus story. And this movie, of course, stops after they leave Egypt. So it's all about getting out of Egypt. And to me, that's only like this one small slice of what the Exodus story is really about. So you have the Egyptians who, of course, are murdering like the Hebrew children. Moses is spared from that. Moses is then going to become the deliverer. You have Moses who sort of goes away into the wilderness and comes back reformed. All of that stuff is there. What we're missing is what happens to the Israelites after they leave Egypt. Well, they pass through the Red Sea, which is like the waters of baptism, and then they go into the wilderness, which is like the purgatorial process where they are completely reformed into something new. All the old generation dies, and it's the new generation that's able to move on into the promised land. So that process of being turned into a new creature, that is really the story of Christian salvation. We're missing that whole second part where you are then having to be led by the Lord, by that pillar of fire and smoke, and you're having to eat the manna from heaven, right? The Passover lamb who's fulfilled in the person of Christ. So all of these signs that exist in the full Christian understanding of how Exodus exists, they're always missing from movies. Instead, it's just sort of a fictionalized retelling of just the facts, man. What are the things that happen? And then we're going to add some stuff in to kind of heighten up the drama. So in this movie, Pharaoh, it's not mentioned in the Bible which Pharaoh is the Pharaoh, but they make him Ramses II, Ramses the Great. And that works. It's a really cool idea to make one of the biggest and most successful pharaohs into the pharaoh from the Bible. We don't really know who that is, but it works, right? It heightens the drama. It's the biggest king that there was, and he's being humbled by a god that he just didn't have any reverence for. So the drama works really, really well in that. You have this competitiveness of the siblings that's just sort of added in, but it works, right? The competitive siblings, one of them leaves, he comes back greater and more profoundly transformed, and his older brother doesn't take him seriously until he's forced to, and all of the tragedy that results from that. The movie ends with Pharaoh not being like drowned in the Red Sea, but basically having his army get drowned, and Pharaoh's left behind in anguish that Moses has escaped and bested him and has disappeared from Egypt. And then we're treated to this last scene of like Moses holding the Ten Commandments, and we don't see any of the stuff that follows that we come back down and you know, they've, in the time that he was away, they've already been trying to form God into an idol of a calf and things like that. We're missing a lot of that ongoing drama. That really the story of salvation occurs across the desert and not just at the Red Sea. But I get why they're only going to tell it up to the Red Sea. That's a great place to just end that story and bring it all nicely together to a good conclusion. So overall, I think it's a great movie, and I think it's still worth watching. I think as long as you're just expecting a fictionalized account of the Bible and you're not wanting it to be too much more than that, you're not wanting it to contain the deeper, more significant spiritual layers that you would expect from a real, fully realized Christian interpretation. I think it won't disappoint, and it's got great music, great production value, of course, and overall, I think it really holds up. In fact, I think it holds up a lot better than a lot of Disney movies from the latter half of the 1990s. But leave me your thoughts down below. I'd love to know them and what you happen to think about this particular movie. And I'll see you all next time. Have a great day. Oh yeah, don't forget to check out the Patreon down below. Please support me. You can get some music, you can get some books as part of that membership, or you can just buy the books on Amazon. Just look them up. That always helps me out, especially anyone that feels like dropping a review for you, a book that you may have gotten. That always helps me out too. Have a great one.